My name is Lauren. I'm 28 years old, and I live alone in a small apartment in Chicago. 3 weeks ago, I drove 4 hours back to my parents' house for what my mom proudly calls our early Christmas family dinner, even though it actually takes place on Thanksgiving. She said it was easier that way. Everyone was off work. Everyone could be there together. I nearly turned the car around twice during that drive, but guilt is a strong motivator. So I arrived with a homemade pumpkin pie and a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. Dinner was loud and chaotic. Football played on the TV. Everyone talked over each other, acting like we were in some kind of Hallmark movie. After the plates were cleared, my mom stood up and clapped her hands for attention like she was hosting an award ceremony. She pulled out a bag filled with wrapped gifts and began handing them out one by one around the table. My dad received a new golf shirt. My uncle got his favorite expensive wine. My sisters received cute, personalized items, bracelets and a spa certificate. People laughed, thanked her, and hugged her. I waited, because there had to be something for me too. When the bag was empty and she still hadn't looked my way, I finally asked as casually as I could, "Is there one for me?" She didn't pause. "Be grateful you can sit here," she said, as if I should be thankful just to be allowed in the room. My uncle snorted and added, "Be glad we still remember your name." The whole table burst into laughter. My face felt hot, but I just nodded and said, "Good to know." No yelling. No tears. I left early, drove back to Chicago in the dark, and decided something needed to change. Because 2 weeks later, those same people who laughed at me were pounding on my door, begging me to talk. That's when the real story began. When I got back to Chicago that night, I dropped my keys on the counter, threw the pumpkin pie in the trash, and sat on the kitchen floor staring at my phone. Threw the pumpkin pie in the trash, and sat on the kitchen floor staring at my phone. Part of me wanted to send a long message in the family group chat explaining exactly how humiliated I felt. But I already knew how that would end. They would say I was overreacting, that it was just a joke, and that I should be grateful they invited me at all. So instead, I texted my best friend, Mia. She called within 30 seconds. I told her everything, from the forced smiles to my mom's comment about being grateful I could sit there, to my uncle's remark about remembering my name. There was a long pause on the line, then Mia said calmly, "Len, that's not normal. That's not just rude. It's cruel. They don't respect you." Hearing someone else say it out loud made something click inside me. While we were still talking, I opened my banking app and started scrolling. Monthly gym charges. Streaming services under my name that I barely used because I was always working. The Amazon Prime family plan. Random tickets, food orders, Uber rides, all those, "Can you put it on your card, I'll pay you back later," moments that never led to repayment. That's when it hit me. For years, I had quietly been the invisible financial backbone of the family they proudly showed off online. They could joke about me at dinner, but they had no problem letting my card stay on file like I was their personal sponsor. Mia said, "What if you just stopped paying? What if you let them feel what it's like to actually lose you?" The idea scared me and excited me at the same time. That weekend, I sat down with my laptop and a notebook and made a list. My mom's yoga and gym membership. My dad's streaming subscriptions and Prime account. My younger sister's last-minute theme park tickets, concerts, gas money. Every autopay tied to my name and their comfort. Then I started canceling. Click, cancel membership. Click, turn off auto-renewal. Click, remove card. With every confirmation email, I felt a little lighter. I didn't post a dramatic announcement in the group chat. I just let the systems they relied on quietly shut down. A few days later, my mom called while I was on my lunch break. No greeting. No small talk. Just, "Lauren, my gym card was declined this morning. Did something happen with the payment?" I swallowed my nerves and said, "Yes, I cancelled it. You'll need to set it up under your own name." She sounded offended. "You know I go to those classes for my health. You know I depend on that." I replied, "You also know what you said to me at dinner. I'm done paying for people who can laugh at me like that." She gasped, as if I had slapped her. Later that night, my dad called because the streaming services weren't working. "It says we need to update the payment," he complained. "You must have messed something up." I said, "I didn't mess anything up. I just stopped paying. You adults. You can manage your own bills." He went quiet, then snapped, "Family takes care of each other, Lauren." I answered, "Exactly. That works both ways." After that, the group chat exploded. Passive-aggressive messages about how some people forget where they came from and how money isn't everything, even though some people think it is. I muted the chat. I decided I wasn't going home for Christmas, no matter how much guilt they tried to use. For the first time in my life, I chose not to play the role they had assigned me. I assumed they would sulk, maybe complain about me, and eventually move on. I underestimated how much they depended on me, not just financially, but for control. As their subscriptions and comforts fell apart, they grew more desperate. That's how I ended up with my entire family outside my apartment door, pounding and shouting to be let in. The first wave hit a few days after I cancelled everything. I was at my desk trying to focus on a campaign brief, rereading the same sentence over and over, when my phone started buzzing non-stop. I didn't post a dramatic announcement in the group chat. I just let the systems they relied on quietly shut down. A few days later, my mom called while I was on my lunch break. No greeting. No small talk. Just, "Lauren, my gym card was declined this morning. Did something happen with the payment?" I swallowed my nerves and said, "Yes, I cancelled it. You'll need to set it up under your own name." She sounded offended. "You know I go to those classes for my health. You know I depend on that." I replied, "You also know what you said to me at dinner. I'm done paying for people who can laugh at me like that." She gasped, as if I had slapped her. Later that night, my dad called because the streaming services weren't working. "It says we need to update the payment," he complained. "You must have messed something up." I said, "I didn't mess anything up. I just stopped paying. You adults. You can manage your own bills." He went quiet, then snapped, "Family takes care of each other, Lauren." I answered, "Exactly. That works both ways." After that, the group chat exploded. Passive-aggressive messages about how some people forget where they came from and how money isn't everything, even though some people think it is. I muted the chat. I decided I wasn't going home for Christmas, no matter how much guilt they tried to use. For the first time in my life, I chose not to play the role they had assigned me. I assumed they would sulk, maybe complain about me, and eventually move on. I underestimated how much they depended on me, not just financially, but for control. As their subscriptions and comforts fell apart, they grew more desperate. That's how I ended up with my entire family outside my apartment door, pounding and shouting to be let in. The first wave hit a few days after I cancelled everything. I was at my desk trying to focus on a campaign brief, rereading the same sentence over and over, when my phone started buzzing non-stop. The family group chat lit up like an alarm. My mom sent a long message about how some people forget who raised them and how hurt she was that I would attack her health by cancelling her gym membership. She made it sound like I had taken away medication, not ended a service bill to my card. She even wrote that yoga was the only thing keeping her sane, as if I were responsible for her emotional stability. My dad followed with his usual comments about sacrifice and family duty, adding his favorite line, "You wouldn't have that fancy job in Chicago if it weren't for us." As if my degree and career were debts I still owed. Then my sisters joined in with emojis and side remarks. One wrote, "Imagine choosing Netflix over your own mom," which was ironic since I cancelled Netflix too, and they used it far more than I did. Another said, "You've changed so much. You used to be nice," followed by a crying emoji and a broken heart. It was the same script as always, just louder and public. I stared at the chat, felt my chest tighten, then muted it again and placed my phone face down on my desk. I could still feel it vibrating every few seconds, like it was anxious itself. 10 minutes later, Mia sent me screenshots from Instagram. "Are you seeing this?" she wrote. My younger sister had posted a black background with white text saying, "Some people will cut off their own blood over money. Remember who was there before your paycheck," followed by a broken heart and praying hands emoji. She didn't tag me, but she didn't need to. Half our extended family followed both of us. My mom commented, "So sad but true. Love you, baby. Some people lose their way." Cousins replied with, "Family over everything, money can't buy loyalty, and people change when they move to the city." Someone even wrote, "You guys are the strongest family I know." It would have been almost funny if it didn't hurt so much. They were rewriting the story in real time, turning themselves into victims and me into someone cold and selfish. No one mentioned my mom telling me to be grateful I could sit at the table. No one mentioned my uncle making my name a joke. No one brought up the years of, "just put it on your card," moments that were suddenly invisible. I locked my phone and sat there, listening to the hum of the office and the tapping of keyboards. I realized I had spent my entire life afraid of being called ungrateful, so I overgave to prove I wasn't. Now that I was finally saying no, that was the exact label they used against me. That night, instead of crying like I usually would, I opened my laptop at my kitchen table and went back to my banking app. If they wanted to talk about sacrifice and responsibility, fine. We could talk numbers, the one thing untouched by guilt or manipulation. I pulled up 5 years of transactions and started filtering. Gym memberships, yoga studios, streaming services, Amazon Prime family plan, theme park tickets labeled, "For Harper and Friends." Concert charges made at 11:59 p.m. after frantic promises to pay me back. Emergency car repairs my uncle couldn't afford that somehow ended up on my card. Restaurant bills I covered because, "You make more than us, it's no big deal." It was painful and strangely validating at the same time. Each line item brought back the exact conversation, the exact moment I swallowed my frustration and smiled. I copied everything into a spreadsheet, added dates and short notes, color-coded categories to stay organized, and watched the total climb until I had to sit back and stare. This wasn't a few kind gestures. It was a pattern. Years of me acting as the safety net whenever someone forgot their wallet, couldn't pay until Friday, or just needed help. I finally understood that, to them, my money was an extension of their own, something they felt entitled to because of family ties and shared history. Into someone cold and selfish. No one mentioned my mom telling me to be grateful I could sit at the table. No one mentioned my uncle making my name a joke. No one brought up the years of, "just put it on your card," moments that were suddenly invisible. I locked my phone and sat there, listening to the hum of the office and the tapping of keyboards. I realized I had spent my entire life afraid of being called ungrateful, so I overgave to prove I wasn't. Now that I was finally saying no, that was the exact label they used against me. That night, instead of crying like I usually would, I opened my laptop at my kitchen table and went back to my banking app. If they wanted to talk about sacrifice and responsibility, fine. We could talk numbers, the one thing untouched by guilt or manipulation. I pulled up 5 years of transactions and started filtering. Gym memberships, yoga studios, streaming services, Amazon Prime family plan, theme park tickets labeled, "For Harper and Friends." Concert charges made at 11:59 p.m. after frantic promises to pay me back. Emergency car repairs my uncle couldn't afford that somehow ended up on my card. Restaurant bills I covered because, "You make more than us, it's no big deal." It was painful and strangely validating at the same time. Each line item brought back the exact conversation, the exact moment I swallowed my frustration and smiled. I copied everything into a spreadsheet, added dates and short notes, color-coded categories to stay organized, and watched the total climb until I had to sit back and stare. This wasn't a few kind gestures. It was a pattern. Years of me acting as the safety net whenever someone forgot their wallet, couldn't pay until Friday, or just needed help. I finally understood that, to them, my money was an extension of their own, something they felt entitled to because of family ties and shared history. I drafted an email addressed to my parents and both sisters. The subject line read, "Since we're talking about who owes what." I paused for a moment, my finger hovering over the keyboard, and then I started typing. In the body of the email, I wrote very plainly that I understood what they had done for me growing up. I acknowledged the roof over my head, the food, the schooling. I made it clear I wasn't pretending I had raised myself. But I also stated that the belief I somehow owed them unlimited financial support and silent tolerance for the rest of my life was neither accurate nor healthy. Then I pasted in the total from the spreadsheet, followed by a brief breakdown listing each category. I didn't accuse them of stealing. I didn't demand immediate repayment like a collections agency. I simply wrote, "If you want to keep saying I'm ungrateful and selfish because I stopped paying, please look at this and ask yourself who has really been taking care of whom." My hands shook when I hit send. My heart was racing, like I'd just jumped into cold water. At the same time, it felt like setting down a weight I'd been carrying for years, a burden I hadn't realized had grown so heavy. My mom's response came quickly, with the subject line in all caps. "How dare you?" The message itself was a long block of text accusing me of being manipulative and cruel. She said only a heartless person would throw money in their parents' faces and claimed I was putting a price on her love and sacrifices. Every example I gave was reframed into a story about how difficult their lives had been and how ungrateful I was for making them feel small. She ended by saying she was ashamed of who I had become and that she didn't recognize me anymore. Then she blocked me on Facebook. I knew she blocked me because Mia sent another screenshot less than an hour later. My mom had posted one of those generic family quote images. Something about family being forever even when some members forget. The caption talked about staying strong in difficult times and being thankful for the children who still honor their parents and understand true loyalty. The likes and supportive comments poured in. People wrote things like, "You're such a good mom," and "Your kids are lucky to have you," and "Don't let anyone tear your family apart," without knowing they were defending someone who had used the word grateful as a weapon against her own child at the dinner table. None of them knew that her quiet Netflix nights and calm yoga mornings had been paid for by the daughter she publicly humiliated. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, angry and shaking. Underneath the anger, though, there was a sharp sense of clarity. They weren't going to suddenly wake up and see me differently. They were committed to this version of me, the ungrateful, difficult city daughter who owed them everything. The only thing I could control was what I allowed them access to: my money, my time, my energy, and my silence. As Christmas got closer and more of their comforts stopped working or asked for new payment details, the tone of their messages shifted. The passive-aggressive posts slowed down. The calls became more frantic, and guilt turned into panic. They stopped only taking shots online and started scrambling in real life, trying to patch the gaps where my support used to be. That's when their entitlement turned louder, harsher, and impossible to ignore. This wasn't something that stayed on a screen. It showed up at my front door. 2 weeks after that Thanksgiving dinner, I was in my apartment on a Saturday afternoon, half watching a random YouTube video and trying not to think about my family, when the buzzer rang. At first, I assumed it was a delivery, but I hadn't ordered anything. Then my phone lit up with my dad's name. I let it go to voicemail. Seconds later, my mom started calling. Then the buzzer sounded. Again, longer this time, like someone was holding it down. My stomach dropped. I walked to the intercom and pressed the button just enough to hear the lobby. That's when my mom's voice echoed up the stairwell, loud and sharp. "Lauren, you know you're home. Buzz us in." Her tone sounded falsely cheerful, like she was performing for anyone nearby, but the anger underneath was clear. I froze, then quietly checked the hallway through my peephole. A few minutes later, I saw them, my mom and dad, outside my apartment door. They had clearly convinced another tenant to let them into the building. My mom was holding a bright red gift bag stuffed with tissue paper, like something out of a commercial. My dad had a couple of smaller bags looped around his wrist. My phone rang again behind me. I let it ring. My mom knocked softly at first. 3 light taps. "Lauren, honey, open up. We brought you something." We just want to talk before Christmas, she called, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. I took a breath, stepped closer, but didn't unlock the door. I don't want to talk right now, I said through the door. You need to leave. Her tone changed instantly. The sweetness disappeared. She knocked harder, the bags rustling. We drove 4 hours to be here, Lauren. 4 hours. The least you can do is open the door and talk to your parents. My dad added, irritated, this is ridiculous. We're not doing this through a door. Open it, I said it again. You don't get to humiliate me, mock me, and then show up with gift bags like that fixes anything. You need to go. There was a brief pause, then the knocking turned into full pounding. My mom's voice rose, shaky and dramatic. She accused the city of changing me, said I thought I was better than them, complained that I cancelled things without warning, and brought up the email again. She said the family was falling apart and I didn't care. My dad lowered his voice, but the anger was still there. This is about respect, Lauren. You owed us a chance to talk in person. Man up and open the door. I almost laughed at, man up, considering this all started with them making fun of me in front of everyone. Instead, I said, respect goes both ways. Standing outside my home and trying to force a conversation I already said no to isn't respect. My phone buzzed. It was my younger sister calling. When I didn't answer, she texted, "They're outside your door. Just open it. Don't make this worse. Mom's freaking out." I replied, "They came without being invited. That's on them." She wrote back, "You're being cruel. They brought Christmas gifts to fix it." Right on cue, my mom leaned into that angle, raising her voice. "We brought you presents, Lauren. We didn't forget you. We're trying. This is what you wanted, right? Attention." I imagined what was in those bags, probably a generic sweater or a candle, something they could later point to as proof they tried. "I don't want gifts," I said. "You're not fixing anything with presents. You never even apologized for laughing at me in front of everyone." There was a moment of silence. Then my mom snapped. "Oh my God, you still on that? It was a joke. Normal people can take a joke at dinner." My dad added that I was blowing one comment out of proportion and punishing the whole family over it. That was when I knew there was nothing waiting for me on the other side of that door. I texted my mom, "You have 10 minutes to leave or I'm calling building security." Out loud, I said, "You need to go. I'm serious." The pounding stopped briefly, then came back even louder, along with crying and pleading. My heart was racing so hard I could hear it, but I didn't move toward the lock. I just stood there, repeating to myself that I was allowed to say no. After about 20 minutes of knocking, crying, and my dad muttering that I was being unreasonable, they finally left. Later that evening, a neighbor emailed me through the building portal, politely asking if everything was okay and mentioning the loud scene outside my door. I sat on my couch, shaking, and opened a blank note on my phone. I wrote down exactly what had happened, every word, every reaction, so I wouldn't let myself be convinced later that I imagined it. The more I wrote, the clearer it became that this wasn't about one dinner or a few cancelled subscriptions. It was about control. They weren't used to me setting boundaries, and they were reacting badly to the word no. I thought that was the worst of it. I assumed they would cool off and back away. I was wrong. That visit was just the beginning. After the gift bag incident, things were quiet for a few days. The group chat slowed to vague quotes about forgiveness and praying for people who lose their way. I muted it, focused on work, met Mia for coffee, and tried to sleep without hearing my mom's words in my head. Then the calls started again. My mom left voicemails crying about her health, her blood pressure, and how stress like this could kill her, asking if that was what I wanted. My dad's messages were colder, saying I was breaking the family and owed them a conversation. When I stopped responding, they started calling from unfamiliar numbers. I answered one, thinking it was work, and my mom said, "So you do still know how to answer a phone?" I hung up. My Uncle Chuck joined in, leaving voicemails about how you can't cancel family like a subscription and how I'd regret it someday. Online, my sister posted another sad video about being abandoned by a sibling who chose money and strangers over family. No names, but the message was obvious. Strangers filled her comments with support, telling her to cut off toxic people. Meanwhile, the fallout from the cancelled payments continued. My mom left a panic message about gym fees and new sign-up costs, saying yoga was the only thing keeping her calm. A cousin told me my dad was complaining at his golf club about ungrateful kids who treat parents like banks. One night, I opened my spreadsheet again and added a column labeled behavior, calls, guilt trips, posts, surprise visits. Seeing it all laid out made it impossible to deny this wasn't temporary. It was a system, and I had stepped out of it. A few days before Christmas, it became physical again. I came home with groceries, saw my parents' car outside, and felt my stomach drop. When I reached my floor, my mom, dad, and Uncle Chuck were standing in front of my apartment like a wall. "There she is," my mom said loudly. "Do you feel proud calling security on your own parents?" I set the groceries down and kept my keys in my hand. "You're not supposed to be here. You need to leave." My dad said they weren't leaving and that I owed them an in-person conversation. My mom accused me of hiding in my apartment and treating them like parasites. My uncle smirked, asking if I really thought my neighbors cared more about me than my own family. "You don't cancel blood," he said. I told them being related didn't give them the right to show up after I told them to stop. My mom scoffed and accused me of twisting everything to paint them as abusive. My dad stepped closer until my door was behind me. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "You're coming home with us for Christmas. This ends now." My voice shook, but I said, "No. I've told you to leave. You're harassing me." My mom slammed her hand against the door near my head, yelling about everything they'd given me and how I owed them. My uncle saw me flinch, smiled, and put his hand on my shoulder, trying to push me away from the lock. Something in me went still. I shrugged his hand off and said clearly, "Do not touch me again." I took out my phone, called building security, and said, "My family is here again. I've asked them to leave. They won't." One of them put his hands on me. "I need someone to come up." They looked at me like I'd caused a major incident. The guard arrived, listened to both sides, then turned to them and said, "She lives here. She's asked you to leave. You can't keep coming here and creating scenes. If you return, we'll have to involve the police." He escorted them to the elevator while my mom cried and my dad muttered about ungrateful children. My uncle shot me one last look and said quietly, "You're going to regret this." Later, management slipped a notice under my door documenting the incident and stating they were not allowed back without permission. It also said repeated visits could lead to a no trespass order and police involvement. For the first time, there was something official saying this wasn't just family drama. Other people saw it. Other people were willing to call it what it was. I wanted to believe that warning would make them stop. But people who are used to control rarely give it up over one piece of paper. And the next time they came, it wouldn't just be security handling it. A few days before Christmas, I finally started to relax. Security had filed their report. My parents and uncle had already been escorted out once, and my phone was quiet for the first time in weeks. I blocked a few numbers, muted the family chat, focused on year-end projects, and held onto the plan of spending Christmas Eve with Mia, eating takeout, and watching mindless movies. I told myself they were done. I was wrong. One afternoon, I was coming up the stairs with groceries when I heard my last name echoing through the stairwell, my mother's voice sharp and too loud. "She's on this floor." "I know she is. Lauren, get out here right now." My stomach dropped. When I turned the corner, they were there again. My mom, my dad, and my Uncle Chuck stood outside my door like they owned the hallway. My mom spun toward me. "There you are," she snapped. "Do you feel powerful now, calling security on your own parents?" My dad stood stiff, jaw tight. My uncle leaned against the wall, watching like it was entertainment. I set my groceries down and kept my keys in my hand. "You're not supposed to be here," I said. "You need to leave." "We're not leaving," my dad replied. "Not until you stop acting like a stranger and talk to us like an adult. We drove all this way before Christmas to fix this." My mom jumped in, her voice rising so every door could hear. She said we were still fighting for the family, but I cut them off, humiliated them with that email, called security, and couldn't even look them in the eye after everything they'd given me. I noticed doors cracking open along the hall. My uncle pushed off the wall and stepped closer. "You think these people care about you more than we do?" he asked, nodding toward the other apartments. "When your city life falls apart, you think they'll take you in? Blood is blood. You don't cancel that." Something in me hardened. "Blood isn't a free pass," I said. "It doesn't give you the right to show up at my home after I told you to stop. It doesn't give you permission to yell at me, corner me, or touch me." My mom scoffed and said no one had touched me, accused me of twisting things to make them look abusive, and claimed security had said there was nothing on camera. She said I'd decided they were monsters so I could feel justified. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my older neighbor down the hall standing in her doorway, phone raised and recording. Our eyes met. She gave a small nod that said she saw what was happening. My dad stepped closer until my back hit my door. His voice dropped. "Here's what's going to happen. You're packing a bag. You're coming home with us for Christmas, and we're ending this now." My hands were shaking, but my words were clear. "No. I'm not going anywhere with you. I've told you to leave. You keep coming back. This is harassment." My mom slammed her hand against the door next to my head, the sound sharp enough to make me flinch. "Harassment," she hissed. "We gave you life. You wouldn't have this apartment or job without us. You owe us respect. You owe us Christmas. You owe us more than this." My uncle saw me flinch and smiled. "You call this harassment," he said, then put his hand on my shoulder and shoved me just enough to move me away from the lock. It wasn't a punch, but it was a message. We still have control. Something inside me went very still. I knocked his hand away and said clearly, "Do not touch me again." Before he could respond, my neighbor's voice cut through the hall. "I'm calling the police," she said. "This is the second time. She asked you to leave. I'm recording everything." For a moment, everyone froze. My mom turned and shouted that it was none of her business, that this was family. My neighbor didn't back down. "You made it our business when you started yelling in the hallway." I could hear sirens faintly in the distance. My mom turned back to me, switching to that pleading tone I knew well. "Lauren, stop this. Tell her not to call. You want your uncle arrested? You want your mother having a heart attack right here? Is that what you want for Christmas?" My chest tightened. For a second, I felt the old urge to fix everything and make it stop. Then I remembered the spreadsheet, the dinner table, the laughter. I took a breath. "I want you to leave," I said. "If you didn't want police involved, you shouldn't have come back." A few minutes later, 2 officers walked down the hall and took in the scene. One asked if I lived there. I said yes and explained that they were my family, that I'd asked them to leave multiple times, that security had already escorted them out once, and that they kept returning and touching me. The other officer spoke to my neighbor, who showed them a video of my uncle grabbing my shoulder and my mom slamming her hand into the door. That was enough. The officer turned to my family and told them they needed to leave immediately. He said they'd been warned, that this was harassment, and that being related didn't give them the right to corner me. If they came back or contacted me like this again, I could pursue a restraining order and charges. My mom cried about being a concerned parent. My dad argued about his rights. My uncle complained under his breath. The officers didn't engage. They pulled my uncle aside, took his ID, and wrote him a citation, explaining what it meant. Watching him stand there while someone in authority told him he was officially on record for harassing his niece changed something for me. For once, I wasn't the one being shamed. As they escorted them toward the elevator, my mom clutched her chest and said she felt dizzy. The officer offered an ambulance. My dad said he'd take her to the hospital. Later, I heard her blood pressure spiked and she spent the night in the ER. I heard my dad was angry about the hospital bill and the citation. I heard my uncle was suddenly quieter at the bar where he used to brag about our perfect family. After they left, management slipped another notice under my door confirming the incident, stating my parents and uncle were not allowed back without permission and reminding me I could pursue a restraining order. A cousin texted me saying people were talking and asking if I was okay. I replied, "I'm okay. Better than before." For the first time, the consequences of their behavior landed on them instead of me. And as Christmas passed in total silence between us, that silence felt less like punishment and more like space. Space to imagine a life not built around managing their chaos. In the weeks after Christmas, the silence felt unreal. I kept waiting for another outburst or visit, but nothing came. No holiday messages, no quotes, nothing. At first, my body stayed tense, like waiting for an alarm. Slowly, it began to feel like room to breathe. Through cousins and mutual friends, I heard what was happening. My mom had follow-up appointments after the ER visit. Her doctor told her she needed to manage stress seriously. Without my money covering extras, she cut back on gym and social activities and asked a younger coworker for help setting up budgeting apps. My dad had to call subscription companies himself, sit on hold, reset passwords, and solve problems without saying, "Ask Lauren." He complained about the hospital bill and the citation, but there was no one left to pass them to. My uncle's image took a hit too. People had seen or heard about the video of him grabbing me and the police writing his citation. He didn't go to jail, but the damage was done. My sisters posted less online. Fewer trips and impulse plans. More talk about extra shifts and goals. When I stepped out of the safety net role, they had to stand on their own. That's when it clicked. My boundary didn't just force me to grow up. It forced all of us to. When the adrenaline wore off, I struggled a bit. Without constant drama, old memories surfaced. The jokes that weren't jokes. The times I paid and stayed quiet. The belief that keeping the peace was my job. I finally booked a therapist. In our first session, she asked, "When did you learn that your role was to fix everything?" I didn't have an easy answer, but the question stayed with me. I also found an online support group and read stories that felt familiar. People talked about guilt, manipulation, emotional abuse, and financial exploitation. Seeing those words didn't change the past, but it changed how I judged myself for stepping away. Months later, my mom sent a short email. No subject. She said she was sorry things got so bad, that she didn't agree with how I handled everything, but that she missed me and hoped I was okay. Hoped she was taking her health seriously, and that if we ever talked again, it would have to be different. No yelling, no guilt, no pretending Thanksgiving was a joke. I said I was open to a conversation someday, preferably with a therapist present, but I wouldn't go back to paying for everything or being grateful just to sit there. Hitting send didn't feel like reopening a door. It felt like locking the old one and leaving only a small, guarded window. I don't know what the future holds with my family. Maybe we'll build something smaller and healthier. Maybe we'll stay low contact. What I do know is this: my peace no longer depends on their moods. I pay my bills for me. I spend holidays with people who don't turn me into a punchline and call it love. I don't measure my worth by how useful I am to the people who raised me. If there's a lesson here, it's that family isn't a free pass to disrespect you. Love without respect is control dressed up as concern. Boundaries aren't betrayal. They are self-respect in action. And sometimes the most powerful choice isn't slamming a door. It's walking away, letting people face the results of their own behavior, and building a life where you're not grateful just to be allowed in the room, but genuinely glad to stand on your own. Have you ever had to choose your own sanity over your family's approval? And if you haven't yet, what line would they have to cross for you to finally say no?